The auction block on Nexus Station's Flesh Market district was exactly as sterile and efficient as Zara Lynn had been told it would be. Clean white surfaces that could be easily sanitized, optimal lighting to display merchandise, and temperature controls designed to keep products at peak freshness during the bidding process. She stood on the raised platform in the specialized restraint harness that held her upright while allowing potential buyers to examine her from every angle, and tried not to think about how this was probably the last day she would be capable of thinking about anything. Lot 847, announced broker Vex Thack, his 6 arms gesticulating dramatically as he began the sales presentation. Premium Kirani female, age 23 standard years, grade A certification in all quality metrics. The auction hall was filled with the kind of beings who could afford top-tier sentient cuisine. Zara Lynn recognized several species from her educational materials. Wealthy hegemony aristocrats with their crystalline exoskeletons, corporate executives from the mining guilds, and what appeared to be celebrity chefs from at least 4 different culinary worlds. All of them studying her with the professional interest of connoisseurs evaluating a rare vintage. Note the exceptional muscle tone, Vex Thack continued, activating the platform's rotating mechanism so buyers could view her from all sides. Perfect protein distribution throughout all major muscle groups, 0 stress markers in the cellular structure, and optimal fat marbling for superior flavor profiles. Zara Lynn maintained her composure, as she had been trained to do since childhood. The biomonitors attached to her skin displayed her vital signs on the auction hall screens, showing the steady heart rate and low stress hormones that indicated premium-grade livestock. Panic or fear would degrade the product quality, and after 23 years of careful conditioning, she no longer experienced such reactions to her intended fate. The Kirani breeding program represents 4 centuries of genetic optimization, the broker was saying, warming to his subject. This particular specimen exhibits all the classic markers: enhanced cellular regeneration for superior texture, modified metabolism for natural flavor enhancement, and the cognitive development that provides the psychological satisfaction discriminating consumers expect from premium sentient cuisine. Several potential buyers were taking notes on their scanners, recording her biological readings for later analysis. Zara Lynn could see the numbers that defined her worth scrolling across the displays: protein density, cellular integrity, stress resistance, estimated yield per kilogram. 23 years of careful diet, exercise, and conditioning reduced to market statistics. Bidding will begin at 50,000 Galactic credits, Vex Thack announced. The first bid came immediately from a hegemony aristocrat whose crystalline body refractions indicated extreme wealth. The bidding climbed rapidly as restaurant owners and private collectors competed for what was clearly recognized as an exceptional specimen. 75,000 from the gentleman in Section 3, Vex Thack called out. Do I hear 80? Zara Lynn watched the numbers climb with detached interest. Higher prices meant her death would at least serve the purpose she'd been created for, providing satisfaction to beings who could properly appreciate the centuries of engineering that had shaped her species. The Kirani existed to be consumed, and she was apparently a very successful example of her kind. 120,000, called out a voice from the premium seating area, where the most exclusive buyers sat in climate-controlled comfort. The bidding continued to escalate, but Zara Lynn could see some of the participants beginning to drop out. Even premium Kirani flesh had practical limits to its value, and the price was approaching levels that only the most dedicated gourmands could justify. 180,000, Vex Thack announced. Going once. The auction hall grew quiet. At this price point, only the most serious collectors were still participating, and even they seemed to be reconsidering the economics of their desire. Going twice. Zara Lynn felt her first flicker of genuine concern. Unsold livestock faced fates considerably worse than being purchased by premium buyers. The discount markets that bought auction remainders were neither quick nor particularly concerned with maintaining product quality during processing. Any final bids? Vex Thack asked, his professional enthusiasm beginning to show cracks as he faced the prospect of an expensive lot going unsold. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Zara Lynn could see Vex Thack preparing to declare the lot withdrawn, which would mean immediate transfer to the bulk processing facilities. She closed her eyes and tried to accept this final disappointment with the same composure she'd maintained throughout her life. 200,000 credits. The voice came from the back of the auction hall, quiet but clear. Every head in the room turned to locate the source of the unexpected bid. Zaralyn opened her eyes and followed the crowd's gaze to see a figure rising from one of the cheapest seats. Human, by the look of her, which was unusual enough to cause murmuring throughout the hall. Humans had strange dietary restrictions and ethical peculiarities that made them uncommon participants in sentient cuisine markets. 200,000 from the human bidder, Vexthak announced, his professional composure returning as he saw profit snatched from the jaws of loss. Do I hear any competing bids? The hall remained silent. No one was interested in bidding against a human who was willing to pay above market prices for merchandise she probably couldn't even properly appreciate. Sold to bidder 1247 for 200,000 galactic credits, Vexthak declared with obvious relief. The restraint harness released, and Zaralyn found herself able to move freely for the first time in hours. A security guard approached to escort her to the processing area where buyers collected their purchases, but she barely noticed him. Her attention was focused on the human who had purchased her, trying to understand what she might expect from an owner with such unusual dietary habits. The human was shorter than average, with dark hair pulled back in a practical style and clothing that suggested scientific or academic profession rather than wealthy dilettante. She didn't look like someone who could casually spend 200,000 credits on luxury food, which made her motivations even more mysterious. This way, product, the security guard said, gesturing toward the exit that led to the collection area. Zaralyn followed obediently, her mind already shifting into the mental state she'd been trained to maintain during the transition from auction to consumption. Acceptance, compliance, and focus on fulfilling her purpose as effectively as possible, regardless of her owner's species or methods. The collection area was a sterile waiting room where purchased merchandise was prepared for transfer to their new owners. Zaralyn was processed through the usual procedures: final health certification, ownership transfer documentation, and preparation for transport. The entire system was designed for efficiency and compliance with galactic health regulations governing sentient food safety. Lot 847, called the transfer clerk, a bored-looking centauri who'd clearly processed thousands of similar transactions. Owner present for collection. The human stepped forward, presenting identification and payment authorization. Zaralyn got her first close look at her purchaser and was struck by the obvious discomfort in the woman's posture. Most buyers collected their purchases with anticipation or professional satisfaction. This human looked like she was attending a funeral. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human said, completing the identification process. I'm here for the Kirani female. Standard disclaimers apply, the clerk recited in a monotone voice. Product is guaranteed fresh for 72 hours, optimal processing window is 48 hours, preparation instructions are included in your documentation package. Dr. Vasquez nodded, though she seemed to be having difficulty looking directly at Zaralyn during the transaction. Strange behavior for someone who just made a substantial investment in premium cuisine. Any special transport requirements? The clerk asked. No, standard arrangements will be fine. The paperwork was completed with bureaucratic efficiency, and suddenly Zaralyn found herself the legal property of a human xenobiologist who seemed actively distressed by the situation. The transfer restraints were removed, leaving her free to move under her own power for the first time since being brought to auction. Come along then, Dr. Vasquez said quietly, still not quite making eye contact. They walked through Nexus Station's commercial district in silence, Zaralyn following her new owner with the trained compliance of livestock while trying to understand the woman's obvious emotional distress. Perhaps humans had ritual requirements that preceded consumption, cultural practices that required specific preparation or ceremonies. Are you feeling unwell, owner? Zaralyn asked finally, concerned that her purchaser's distress might indicate dissatisfaction with the product quality. Dr. Vasquez stopped walking abruptly, turning to stare at her with an expression of shock. Are you asking about my well-being? Of course, owner. Your satisfaction with your purchase is my primary concern. If there are preparation requirements or cultural practices I should observe, I am trained to comply with most major species preferences. Cultural practices, Dr. Vasquez repeated faintly. Right. Of course. They resumed walking, but Zara Lynn could sense increased tension in her owner's posture. Perhaps human consumption rituals were more complex than her education had covered. She made a mental note to be especially attentive to instructions, since failing to properly fulfill her function would waste the considerable investment Dr. Vasquez had made. The residential section of Nexus Station was quieter than the commercial areas, with private quarters and temporary housing for visitors conducting business on the station. Dr. Vasquez led them to a modest suite that appeared to be furnished for extended stays rather than luxury accommodation. This is where you're staying?" Zara Lynn asked, looking around the obviously temporary housing. "For now," Dr. Vasquez replied, activating the privacy screens and security systems. "Until we figure out what to do next." "Owner, I'm confused about the preparation timeline. Most purchasers have specific facilities for processing, but this appears to be standard residential accommodation." Dr. Vasquez turned to face her fully for the first time, and Zara Lynn was surprised to see what appeared to be tears in the human's eyes. "Zara Lynn," she said, reading the name from the ownership documentation. "I need you to understand something very important. I didn't buy you to eat you. I bought you to save you." Zara Lynn stared at Dr. Vasquez for several long seconds, trying to process words that made no sense within any framework she understood. Save her? From what? For what purpose? "I don't understand, owner," she said finally. "If you're not planning to consume me, why did you purchase me?" The auction was specifically for premium culinary products. Dr. Vasquez sat down heavily in one of the suite's chairs, running her hands through her hair in what appeared to be frustration or distress. "Because I couldn't just stand there and watch you get sold to someone who would eat you. The whole thing is..." She searched for words. "It's barbaric." "Barbaric?" Zara Lynn felt genuine confusion. "Owner, I am a Karani. We are bred specifically for consumption by superior species. My existence serves no other purpose. How can fulfilling one's biological destiny be barbaric?" "Because you're a person," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice rising with emotion. "You think, you feel, you have consciousness and opinions and you just asked me about my well-being. People aren't food, regardless of what their genetics were designed for." Zara Lynn processed this statement carefully. Her educational programming had covered many alien philosophical concepts, but this particular viewpoint was entirely foreign to her experience. "I appreciate your concern, owner, but I think there may be some confusion about Karani biology. We are not people in the same sense as humans or other independent species. We are purpose-bred livestock with enhanced cognitive function to improve the consumption experience. My consciousness exists to serve your satisfaction as a consumer." Dr. Vasquez looked like she might be sick. You're not livestock. You're a sentient being with thoughts and feelings and the right to make your own choices about your life." "Rights?" Zara Lynn had never encountered this concept in her education. "I'm afraid I don't understand that term in this context. The right to live your own life, to make decisions about what you want to do, to be free from being treated as property or food. But owner, what would I do with such rights? I was created to serve as premium cuisine. All of my biological systems, my education, my entire existence has been optimized for that purpose. Remove that function, and I become nothing." Dr. Vasquez stood up and began pacing, which Zara Lynn recognized as a stress behavior in many species. Perhaps the human was having second thoughts about her purchase and was trying to determine the most efficient way to proceed with consumption after all. "You're not nothing," Dr. Vasquez said firmly. "You're a person who was kidnapped as a species and forced into slavery. The fact that it happened over generations doesn't make it less wrong." Slavery? Another unfamiliar concept. Owner, I think you may be misunderstanding the nature of our relationship. You purchased me legally through proper channels. I am your property to use as you see fit. This is not slavery, it's commerce. Being able to buy and sell people is the definition of slavery. Zaralyn was beginning to worry that her owner might be experiencing some form of psychological distress that could interfere with the proper completion of their transaction. She had been trained to manage difficult consumers, but this particular form of distress was outside her experience. Owner, she said gently, perhaps you should rest. The auction process can be stressful for first-time buyers. Once you've had time to recover, we can discuss preparation methods that align with your cultural preferences. I don't have cultural preferences for preparing people to eat because I don't eat people. Then, what do you intend to do with me? Dr. Vasquez stopped pacing and looked at her directly. I intend to help you escape to somewhere safe where you can build whatever kind of life you choose for yourself. Zaralyn felt something that might have been panic beginning to build in her chest. The concept Dr. Vasquez was describing sounded like the waste of centuries of careful breeding and conditioning, the complete negation of everything she had been created to accomplish. Owner, that would mean my entire existence was meaningless. Everything my species endured to create the perfect food source, all the generations of careful improvement, the suffering of my ancestors to give their descendants purpose, all wasted. No, Dr. Vasquez said softly. It would mean you get to define your own meaning instead of having it defined for you by people who see you as a product. But I don't know how to define meaning. I only know how to be what I was made to be. Then we'll figure it out together. Dar. Vasquez moved to her travel pack and began pulling out equipment that looked scientific rather than culinary. Scanners, data pads, and what appeared to be communication devices arranged on the suite's table. What is all that? Zaralyn asked. Research equipment. I'm a xenobiologist studying the genetics of engineered species. I came to Nexus Station to investigate reports of illegal sentient trafficking, but I never expected to. She gestured helplessly at Zaralyn. To be in a position where I could actually help someone directly. Help me do what, exactly? Escape. There are sanctuary worlds where rescued Karani can learn to live independently. Places where you'd be safe from being recaptured and sold again. Zaralyn sat down slowly, trying to process this information. There are other Karani who have chosen not to fulfill their purpose. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Living their own lives, learning skills, forming relationships, doing whatever they find meaningful. But what do they do for sustenance? For shelter? For purpose? The same things everyone else does. They work, they learn, they love, they create things. They're people, Zaralyn, not products. This is very difficult to understand, Zaralyn admitted. In my entire education, I was never taught that such alternatives existed. Of course you weren't. The people who bred your species for consumption wouldn't want you to know there were other options. Dr. Vasquez activated one of her communication devices and began setting up what appeared to be a secure connection. I'm going to contact some colleagues who work with refugee resettlement. They can explain this better than I can. Refugee resettlement? Programs that help people escape from slavery and trafficking situations. Help them find new homes where they're free to live as they choose. Zaralyn watched Dr. Vasquez work, noting the careful way she handled the communication equipment and the obvious security protocols she was following. This was clearly more than casual humanitarian concern, it was organized resistance to the systems that had created and maintained Karani servitude. Owner, she said carefully, are you part of some form of illegal organization? Dr. Vasquez paused in her work. Illegal according to the governments that profit from treating sentient beings as property, yes. Morally justified according to any reasonable standard of ethics, also yes. And you want me to join this organization? I want you to have the choice to join it, or not join it, or do something completely different with your life. I want you to have choices, period. Zaralyn was quiet for several minutes, trying to wrap her mind around concepts that felt as foreign as breathing water. Choice. Freedom. Self-determination. Rights. All words that had no meaning within her understanding of existence. If I choose not to be consumed, she said slowly, what happens to all the resources that were invested in creating me? The generations of breeding, the careful conditioning, the specialized education. Those resources were stolen from your ancestors without their consent, Dr. Vasquez said firmly. You don't owe anyone a return on an investment made in your oppression. But then what is my purpose? What am I for? Dr. Vasquez looked at her with an expression of such profound sadness that Zaralyn wondered if she had somehow caused offense. You're for whatever you want to be for, the human said quietly. That's what freedom means. You get to decide what your life is about. The communication device chimed with an incoming connection. Dr. Vasquez activated the privacy screen and gestured for Zaralyn to come closer. I have someone I'd like you to talk to, she said. Her name is Kiravel, and she's a Kirani who escaped the breeding programs 15 years ago. She now helps run one of the sanctuary programs. The holographic display showed a figure that was unmistakably Kirani, the golden skin, the elongated pointed ears, the perfect physical proportions that marked their engineered heritage. But something was different about this individual. She moved with confidence, spoke with authority, and her eyes held a quality that Zaralyn had never seen in another of her species. Hello, Zaralyn, Kiravel said warmly. Dr. Vasquez told me about your situation. I want you to know that you're safe now, and that you have options you've probably never imagined. You're really Kirani? Zaralyn asked, still struggling to believe what she was seeing. I was bred on the same type of facilities that created you. Raised to believe my only value was as food for superior species. It took me years to understand that those beliefs were lies designed to keep me compliant. But, what do you do now? How do you live? Kiravel smiled, and Zaralyn realized she was seeing something she'd never witnessed before, a Kirani expressing genuine happiness about her own existence. I teach other rescued Kirani how to read and write. I help run agricultural programs on our sanctuary world. I have friends, hobbies, a partner who loves me for who I am rather than what I was designed for. I have a life that belongs to me. And you're happy. Happier than I ever imagined was possible when I was still believing the lies about my purpose. Zaralyn looked between Kiravel and Dr. Vasquez, beginning to understand that she was being offered something unprecedented in her species. Zaralyn stared at Dr. Vasquez for several long seconds, trying to process words that made no sense within any framework she understood. Learning to be free, Zaralyn discovered over the next few days, was considerably more complicated than learning to be livestock had ever been. The concepts Dr. Vasquez was trying to teach her seemed to change shape every time she thought she understood them, like trying to hold water in her hands. Choice means you get to decide what you want to do with your time, Dr. Vasquez explained for the third time as they sat in the sweet small kitchen area. Not what someone else tells you to do, not what you were designed to do. What you want to do. But how do I know what I want? Zaralyn asked, staring at the selection of food items Dr. Vasquez had provided. I've never had to want anything before. My preferences were programmed to optimize nutritional intake and maintain product quality. Then we start simple. Look at these foods and tell me which one looks most appealing to you. Zaralyn examined the options carefully. Her conditioning immediately began analyzing nutritional content, flavor profiles, and optimal consumption timing, but Dr. Vasquez had asked about appeal, not nutritional efficiency. I think I like the color of this one, she said hesitantly, pointing to a piece of fruit with bright orange skin. Why do you like the color? I don't know. It makes me feel something pleasant when I look at it. Dr. Vasquez smiled. That's called preference. It's one of the building blocks of personal identity. Is it normal to have preferences that serve no productive purpose? Perfectly normal. Most preferences don't serve any purpose except making us happy or satisfied. That's enough reason by itself. Zara Lynn took a small bite of the orange fruit, focusing not on its nutritional value but on the experience of eating it. The taste was sweet with underlying complexity, and the texture was pleasantly firm. More importantly, consuming it produced a sensation she had difficulty naming. "How do you feel?" Dr. Vasquez asked. "Good. But not in the way food usually makes me feel good. This is different. That's enjoyment. Pleasure for its own sake, not because it serves any function." Over the following days, Dr. Vasquez introduced her to other concepts that were equally foreign to her experience. Privacy, which meant being able to keep thoughts and activities to herself. Leisure, which involved activities that served no purpose except personal satisfaction. Relationships, which were connections between people based on mutual affection rather than utility. "I have a confession to make," Dr. Vasquez said on their fourth day together as they sat reviewing refugee resettlement options on her data pad. "I'm not just a xenobiologist studying trafficking. I'm part of the Human Liberation Coalition's rescue operations." Rescue operations? "We work to extract sentient beings from slavery situations and help them find freedom. I came to Nexus Station specifically to investigate the flesh markets and document violations of Galactic sentient rights laws." Zara Lynn processed this information. "So when you purchased me, it wasn't an impulse decision?" "No, it wasn't planned, but it wasn't entirely impulsive either. I've been involved in rescue work for 5 years now. When I saw you on that auction block..." Dr. Vasquez's expression grew distant. "I couldn't just document it for later prosecution. I had to do something immediate." "Have you rescued other Kirani?" "Dozens. But usually we work through more covert methods. Buying someone at open auction was definitely improvising." This revelation changed Zara Lynn's understanding of their relationship in ways she was still trying to process. Dr. Vasquez wasn't just a kind human with unusual ethics. She was a professional liberator who had risked her own safety to save people she didn't know. "Why do humans care what happens to other species?" Zara Lynn asked. "You gain nothing from liberating Kirani. We provide no benefit to human society. We care because suffering is wrong regardless of who's experiencing it," Dr. Vasquez said simply. "And because we believe all sentient beings have inherent value that exists independent of their utility to others." Inherent value? Worth that comes from being alive and aware, not from being useful. You have value because you exist, because you can think and feel and experience the universe. Not because of what you can do for someone else. This concept was perhaps the most difficult for Zara Lynn to accept. Her entire existence had been predicated on utility, on serving the needs of beings considered superior. The idea that she might possess value simply by existing seemed almost presumptuous. But if everyone has inherent value regardless of utility, how do societies function? How are resources allocated? How are decisions made about who deserves what? Those are complicated questions that different cultures answer in different ways, Dr. Vasquez admitted. But the starting point is recognizing that everyone deserves basic dignity and the opportunity to make their own choices about their lives. Their conversation was interrupted by an alert from Dr. Vasquez's security system. Someone was approaching their quarters, and the movement patterns suggested professional surveillance rather than casual traffic. "We may have a problem," Dr. Vasquez said, quickly activating privacy shields and checking her weapons. "Someone's been watching this suite." Zara Lynn felt familiar conditioning kick in as adrenaline flooded her system. Threat response protocols that had been bred into her species for survival in dangerous situations. But instead of the usual submissive compliance, she found herself thinking tactically about their options. "If they're bounty hunters looking for escaped merchandise, they'll expect me to be compliant and you to be unprepared for resistance," she said, surprising herself with the analysis. "That's actually very good tactical thinking," Dr. Vasquez said, checking the surveillance feeds from her equipment. 3 individuals, moving with coordination suggesting military or security training. Vrakeen? Zaralyn asked, recognizing the movement patterns from her education about the species that most commonly hunted escaped Kirani. Probably. Which means they're not here to negotiate. Zaralyn felt something she had never experienced before, anger on her own behalf. Not the trained compliance she'd been conditioned to feel when facing recapture, but genuine outrage at beings who would try to force her back into slavery after she'd begun to understand what freedom might mean. What are our options? She asked. We fight, we run, or we hide. Fighting 3 trained bounty hunters isn't great odds. Running means abandoning all our equipment and hoping we can reach the sanctuary networks before they track us down. What about hiding? Only works if they don't have advanced scanning equipment, which they probably do. Zaralyn was quiet for a moment, considering alternatives. Her education had included extensive training in Kirani recapture methods, information intended to help her avoid accidentally triggering pursuit responses but which now provided tactical intelligence about their enemy's likely approach. They'll expect me to be hiding in the safest area of the suite, probably with you guarding me, she said. They'll also expect me to surrender immediately if threatened with harm to my rescuer. Will you? Zaralyn considered the question seriously. 3 days ago, the answer would have been an automatic yes. Her conditioning would have compelled her to surrender rather than risk harm to someone who had shown her kindness. But something had changed in her thinking, something she was only beginning to understand. No, she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I won't go back to being food for someone else. Not now that I know there are alternatives. Dr. Vasquez looked at her with an expression of pride and concern. Then we fight. But I need to know you can handle seeing violence and maybe participating in it. Your conditioning. My conditioning included survival training for dangerous situations. I was educated to be valuable property, not helpless property. The Vrakeen may have underestimated what that education included. The approach team had reached their door and were setting up what appeared to be breach equipment. Dar. Vasquez moved to her defensive position while Zaralyn found herself calculating angles, timing, and tactical advantages with skills she hadn't known she possessed. Dr. Elena Vasquez, called a voice from outside. We know you're harboring stolen property. Return the Kirani female and there will be no legal consequences for your interference. Legal according to who? Dr. Vasquez called back. The same governments that legalize slavery. Surrender the property, human. This is your final warning. Zaralyn felt the last of her conditioning snap into a new configuration. She was no longer property to be returned or rescued. She was a person fighting for her right to exist on her own terms. Dr. Vasquez, she said quietly, I think it's time I learned what it means to fight for my freedom. The door exploded inward, and Zaralyn discovered that choosing to resist rather than comply felt like waking up after a lifetime of sleepwalking. For the first time in her existence, she was acting according to her own will rather than someone else's design. It was, she realized as she moved to defend her friend and her newfound freedom, exactly what being alive was supposed to feel like. The Vrakeen bounty hunters had made one critical miscalculation. They expected to face a human rescuer protecting compliant livestock, not 2 partners working together with complementary skills and shared determination. The first hunter through the door found himself facing not cowering prey but tactical coordination that turned their own assumptions against them. Zaralyn moved with the fluid grace her species had been bred for, but instead of displaying herself for evaluation, she used her enhanced physicality to disarm the nearest attacker while Dr. Vasquez provided covering fire from her defensive position. The bounty hunters had sophisticated weapons and armor, but they'd planned for a capture operation, not a genuine fight. The female is resisting, the lead hunter shouted into his communication device, clearly surprised by this development. Repeat, the merchandise is actively hostile. I'm not merchandise, Zaralyn said, using the hunter's momentary confusion to strike at weak points in his armor that her education had taught her to recognize for entirely different purposes. I'm a person, and this person chooses not to be captured. The fight was brief but decisive. The hunters had expected to face one armed human and one compliant Karani. Instead they encountered two individuals who fought with the desperate efficiency of people defending their right to exist. When the security forces finally arrived, alerted by weapon discharges, they found 3 unconscious bounty hunters and considerable evidence of illegal slave hunting operations. Well, Dr. Vasquez said as station security documented the scene, that's definitely going to require some explanation. Captain Rodriguez of Nexus Station Security was a professional law enforcement officer who had seen most variations of criminal activity during his career, but the situation in Dr. Vasquez's suite was unusual even by his standards. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, he said, reviewing his notes. Dr. Vasquez, you purchased a Karani at legal auction, then claim you were attacked by bounty hunters attempting to reclaim stolen property? The auction was legal under current statutes, Dr. Vasquez replied carefully. The bounty hunters were operating under fraudulent recovery contracts. Zara Lynn is not stolen property, she's a person who was illegally trafficked. The Karani are classified as enhanced livestock under Galactic commerce regulations, Captain Rodriguez pointed out. Legally speaking, they're not considered persons under most jurisdictions. Zara Lynn stepped forward, and Rodriguez found himself looking directly into the eyes of someone he'd been trained to regard as sophisticated property. What he saw there challenged every assumption he'd held about the classification systems that govern interspecies commerce. Captain Rodriguez, she said with quiet dignity, I am standing here speaking to you as one conscious being to another. I have thoughts, feelings, preferences, and the desire to make my own choices about my life. If that doesn't qualify as personhood, then your legal definitions need to be reconsidered. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the disconnect between legal categories and the evidence of sentient consciousness standing before him. Finally, he turned to Dr. Vasquez. The bounty hunters were operating without proper jurisdiction on this station. Their contracts appear to be fraudulent, and they used excessive force in attempting to retrieve what they claimed was stolen property. I'm going to classify this as an illegal recovery attempt and hold them for prosecution. What about Zara Lynn's status? Dr. Vasquez asked. That's above my authority level. But as far as station security is concerned, she's a resident under your responsibility until the legal questions get sorted out by higher authorities. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to buy them time and legitimacy. Over the following days, as Dr. Vasquez's colleagues in the Human Liberation Coalition worked on long-term solutions, Zara Lynn found herself becoming something unprecedented in Galactic law, a Karani who was treated as a person rather than property. The process of legal recognition was complex and often frustrating, involving testimonies, psychological evaluations, and debates between legal scholars about the criteria for personhood. But throughout it all, Zara Lynn discovered reserves of strength and determination she'd never been allowed to develop. The preliminary ruling is favorable, Dr. Vasquez announced, returning from the latest legal proceeding. The Galactic Court has agreed to hear arguments about Karani sentience and the legality of treating conscious beings as livestock. How long will that take? Years, probably. But it's a start. And in the meantime, you have provisional protection status as a person rather than property. Zara Lynn was quiet, processing the implications. What happens to me while we wait for the courts to decide whether I'm a person? You get to live like a person and figure out what that means for you specifically. Over the following months, Zara Lynn did exactly that. She learned to read and write in several languages, developed skills in biotechnology that built on her species' natural abilities, and began working with other rescued Karani to help them navigate the transition from slavery to freedom. Her first independent decision was to change her name to Zara Riley Vasquez, honoring both her original identity and the family bonds she'd chosen to create. Her second decision was to join Dr. Vasquez's rescue operations as a full partner, using her intimate knowledge of trafficking systems to help liberate others of her kind. Any regrets? Dr. Vasquez asked one evening as they prepared for another rescue mission. They'd developed into an effective team over the past year, combining Elena's scientific expertise with Zara's understanding of the systems they were fighting. About what? About choosing freedom over the purpose you were designed for. Zara considered the question seriously. A year ago, she would have been consumed by now, her biological perfection serving the pleasure of some wealthy gourmand. Instead, she was sitting in a ship they'd modified for rescue operations, planning how to extract 3 more Kirani from a breeding facility. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," she said. "I realize that I'm still fulfilling my purpose, just not the purpose others chose for me. I was bred to be perfect, to serve others, to make their lives better. I'm still doing all of that. How do you figure? Every Kirani we rescue, every trafficking operation we shut down, every legal precedent we establish, it all serves others, makes lives better, strives for perfection. Just a different kind of perfection than what I was originally designed for." Elena smiled. "So you found a way to honor your heritage while rejecting your programming." "I found a way to be both what I was created to be and what I chose to become. My body is still perfect, perfect for the work I've chosen to do with it." Their communication system chimed with an incoming message from their next target facility. 3 more Kirani scheduled for auction, all young, all believing they had no purpose beyond serving as luxury food for beings who saw them as products rather than people. "Ready to go save some people?" Elena asked. Zara checked their equipment one more time, her enhanced physiology and trained grace now serving purposes of liberation rather than consumption. In a few hours, she'd be standing where she'd once stood, but this time as a rescuer rather than merchandise. "More than ready," she said. "Let's go teach them what it means to be free." The ship lifted off from Nexus Station, carrying 2 partners who had discovered that the most important choices weren't always the ones you were designed to make, but the ones you decided to make for yourself. Behind them, the legal proceedings that would eventually reshape galactic law continued their slow progress toward justice. Ahead of them, 3 people who didn't yet know they were people waited to discover that their perfect bodies belonged to them, not to anyone willing to pay for the privilege of consuming perfection. It was, Zara reflected as they jumped to hyperspace, exactly the kind of perfect purpose she'd always been meant to serve. Just not in the way anyone had originally planned. Sometimes the most beautiful transformations came not from fulfilling your design, but from transcending it entirely and choosing your own definition of what it meant to be perfect.